There was something sacred about mornings now. The way the light eased through the curtains instead of bursting in. The way time seemed to stretch instead of chase. For Meryl Streep, mornings had become her favorite part of the day. Not because they were eventful, but because they were hers. She sat in the sunroom of her Connecticut farmhouse, a modest place filled with quiet things. Well-loved books, a few aging photographs, the gentle ticking of a wooden clock that once belonged to her grandmother. She had spent a lifetime portraying other people, but here, in the soft hush of early light, she was no one but Meryl. And that was enough. Her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, not coffee, not anymore, with a splash of milk and just a bit of honey, the way her mother used to make it. On the windowsill sat a vase of fresh lilacs, gathered from her garden by Ellie, her youngest granddaughter, the day before. "They smell like spring and secrets," Ellie had said, and Meryl had laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was beautifully true. The phone rang. She recognized the number before she picked it up. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in." It was Anna, her middle daughter, calling from Minneapolis. Always the careful one, the peacemaker. They spoke for 10 minutes about nothing in particular. Tulips blooming, a new neighbor moving in, the way time felt oddly suspended these days. And when they hung up, Meryl lingered by the phone, her fingers still curved in midair, as if holding on to the presence of her daughter just a little longer. Later, she moved through the house with ease. There was no rush anymore, and she had no need for it. She opened a letter from a friend in Maine, a handwritten note full of crooked lines and tender memories. She placed it beside an old photograph of herself and James, her late husband, taken during their second year of marriage, when he surprised her with a picnic by the sea. Grief had softened over the years. It no longer took the shape of tears. Instead, it visited her like a sigh, a cool breeze on the back of her neck, a memory stirred by the smell of old pine. She had learned not to chase it away. She took her daily walk at noon, down the gravel path to the edge of the pond. The geese were there again, stubborn and loud, just as they had been last spring. She waved to Walter, the widower who tended the little chapel garden. He tipped his hat, and she smiled, a small, wordless connection that reminded her how deeply she valued the ordinary. That evening, Meryl sat at the piano bench, not to play, but to think. Her fingers rested on the keys without pressing them. Music, like memory, lived in silence too. And somewhere in the distance, a storm threatened the sky, but never quite arrived. She spoke aloud just once. "I miss being needed." The room didn't respond. It never did. But the lilacs still leaned toward the window light, and that was answer enough. If you're still watching at this point, I just want to say thank you. If this story has touched a quiet place in your heart, would you consider giving it a gentle like? And maybe even subscribing? Not because you have to, but because sometimes it's just nice to be reminded we're walking these roads together. It had been 3 months since Grace Hamilton, Meryl's eldest, had visited the farmhouse. Not because of any tension, quite the opposite. Grace lived in Boston with her husband and their teenage son, juggling piano recitals, orthodontist appointments, and an ever-growing list of work deadlines. But this weekend, she had carved out the time. Just a mother and daughter, a basket of peaches between them, and a whole Sunday afternoon stretching wide and slow. Meryl heard the crunch of tires on the gravel before she saw the car. She opened the front door just as Grace stepped out, arms already reaching. "Hi, Mom," Grace said, holding her a little too tight, a little too long. "Hi, sweetheart," Meryl whispered back. She noticed the fine lines near Grace's eyes. Not just age, but worry. The kind of worry a mother recognizes even when no words are spoken. Inside, the house filled with the smell of warm cinnamon scones, which Meryl had baked earlier, not to impress, just to say, "I've been thinking of you." They sat at the kitchen table, sun draping over their shoulders like a soft shawl, as they peeled the peaches slowly and without hurry. "You remember that summer in Cape Cod?" Grace asked suddenly, as if the memory had tugged her by the sleeve. Meryl smiled. "You mean the one where you insisted the ocean was actually made of saltwater taffy?" Grace laughed, eyes wet with nostalgia. I was 7. I still kind of believe it." They shared a silence, the kind that only deep love can fill. And then Grace reached across the table and took Meryl's hand. "I don't tell you enough, but you taught me how to be brave. You still do." Meryl's throat tightened, but she didn't let the tears come just yet. She simply nodded, tracing small circles with her thumb on her daughter's knuckles. That afternoon, they walked through the orchard, the old apple trees bending gently with the breeze. Grace stopped beside the tree James had planted the year their son was born. "I still remember him digging that hole, swearing the ground was made of cement," Grace said. Meryl chuckled. "He was always dramatic with a shovel." "I miss him." "Me too," Meryl replied. "But he's in all of this. The trees, the way you laugh, the fact that you came back today." They sat on the bench beneath the tallest tree, and Grace rested her head on her mother's shoulder like she hadn't done in decades. "I'm tired, Mom," she admitted quietly. "I love my life, but I'm tired. And sometimes I don't know who I am underneath all the lists and obligations." Meryl kissed the top of her daughter's hair. "You're still Grace," she said. "And tired isn't weak. It's just human. Let the tiredness pass through. It always does." As the sun dipped low and the orchard turned golden, they walked back in silence. Meryl held the basket of peaches. Grace held her mother's hand. That evening, after Grace had gone to bed in the guest room, Meryl sat in her reading chair with a letter from a fan she'd never met. The woman had written, "You've always felt like a sister to me, even through the screen." Meryl folded the note gently and placed it in the drawer with others like it, tiny testaments to the invisible threads women weave between one another. Threads of strength, longing, forgiveness, and time. The house was quiet again, but now it felt full. The attic had its own smell, cedar and thyme. Meryl Streep climbed the narrow staircase slowly, one hand grazing the banister, the other steadying an old canvas box filled with mementos she hadn't touched in years. Outside, the rain came down softly, like a lullaby whispered over rooftops. It was the kind of afternoon that asked you to remember. She was searching for a photo album, but what she found instead was a pale blue envelope tucked between the pages of an aging theater program from her Broadway days. Her name, Meryl, was written on the front in her own handwriting, unmistakably hers, though thinner, more careful. She sat down on old trunk and opened it. "Dear Ellie," it began. "I saw a girl on the subway today who had your eyes. That same glint, like she was always about to burst out laughing at something she hadn't told you yet. And for a moment, I forgot we lost touch." Her throat tightened as she read. The words flowed with intimacy, unfinished and raw. The letter dated back almost 50 years, written one late night in her 20s when she'd been living in a shoebox apartment with paper-thin walls and 1,000 dreams. Eleanor Davis had been her first real friend. Not just a playmate, but the keeper of her secrets, her silly poems, her fears about never being enough. They'd lost contact somewhere between auditions, weddings, and motherhood. There'd been no falling out. Just life moving too fast. Meryl traced the final sentence with her finger. "You once told me that love is anything that makes you less afraid to be yourself. I think that's still the best definition I've ever heard." But the letter stopped there. No goodbye, no signature, just a dangling memory that had never quite found its ending. She hadn't thought about Eleanor in years. Yet now, her mind wandered through old moments with vivid clarity, sharing licorice in a movie theater, trying on each other's perfume, writing plays no one ever saw. How strange, she thought, that someone could shape your soul and yet disappear from your days. She held the letter to her chest for a long moment, then descended the stairs with care. The rain had stopped. The sky outside the kitchen window had cleared to a soft gray blue, and the lilacs leaned toward the light again. She didn't try to look Eleanor up. Something about that felt wrong, as if the memory was enough. But that evening, she sat with her journal and wrote to her anyway. "Ellie, if you're still out there, I want you to know I didn't forget you. I grew up like we both feared we would, but I never stopped caring the way you saw me. I hope you found someone who listens the way you always did. She closed the notebook and lit a candle beside the window, more as a ritual than anything else. The flickering light danced gently on the glass pane. Some friendships aren't meant to last forever in presence, just in essence. And this one, Meryl knew, lived quietly in the corners of her spirit, like a song she didn't play anymore, but could hum without thinking. And that, in its own way, was a kind of forever. It was a Wednesday morning, bright and crisp, when Walter Green knocked on Meryl's garden gate. He wore his usual corduroy jacket and had a bouquet of small, clumsy wildflowers in one hand, yellow ones that looked like they'd grown near the chapel road. "Are these weeds?" he asked sheepishly. "They're beautiful," she smiled. "Anything given in kindness can't be a weed." Walter had lived down the road for nearly 15 years. A retired historian, he spent most of his time reading old war diaries and planting tomatoes. He'd lost his wife, Clara, almost a decade ago, and though time had softened his grief, it still lived behind his eyes. They had shared many casual conversations at the post office, outside church, in line at the market, but never dinner. Not until now. "Would you maybe let me take you out?" he asked, his voice gentle but hopeful. "Just dinner. Just company." Meryl didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said. They chose a quiet inn, the kind with candles on the tables and faded paintings of New England harbors. No one rushed them. Their waiter spoke softly and never interrupted. It was a relief to dine without pretense, just two people who'd seen enough of life to sit still with it. They talked about books first. Meryl had just finished rereading Gilead, then about Clara and James, and what it meant to grow old with a heart that still beat a little faster when someone touched your hand. "Do you miss the stage?" Walter asked between bites of roast chicken. "Sometimes," Meryl answered, "but not in the way people think. I miss the feeling of becoming someone else, not the applause. I think in some ways I did that off stage too. Became what everyone needed." Walter nodded slowly. "And who takes care of the part that's just Meryl?" She looked at him, surprised. No one had asked her that before. Not in a very long time. That part lives quietly now, but she still shows up. After dinner, they strolled through the inn's garden. Fireflies lit the path like blinking thoughts. Walter offered her his arm, and she accepted it with a smile. Not romance. Not yet. Just steadiness. At one point, he stopped beneath a willow tree and turned to her. "I'm not trying to fill any space someone else left," he said. "I just enjoy being in your company. You make the silence feel warm." Meryl looked at him for a long moment, her voice soft. "Then stay a while." They didn't make plans. They didn't need to. The simplicity of the evening was its own kind of promise. That night, back home, Meryl stood before her mirror brushing her silver-streaked hair. She caught her own reflection and thought, "I still have light." Not the spotlight, a quieter light. She glanced at James's picture, resting her hand beside it. "It was a good night," she whispered. And in her heart, she knew he would have approved. The chapel sat quietly at the edge of town, its white steeple rising gently above the cottonwood trees like a finger pointing toward grace. Meryl hadn't been there in some time, not out of loss of faith, but out of habit. For years, her Sundays had been filled with travel, rehearsals, family birthdays, red carpets, grandbabies. Life had always been a little too full. But this Sunday, with nothing pulling her forward or back, she put on her coat and walked the familiar path toward stillness. The chapel had wooden pews that creaked and windows that caught morning light in soft blues and golds. Meryl sat near the back, where she always had, not to hide, but to feel part of something quietly. Around her, older couples held hands. A little boy in the front row whispered something to his grandfather, who smiled with his whole face. No one looked at her as Meryl Streep. They just smiled as one smiles to a neighbor, and that was deeply comforting. The sermon was about kindness, but not the kind you perform. The kind that endures when no one's watching. The pastor, a woman with silver hair and warm eyes, said softly, "Sometimes the most important act of love is simply showing up." Meryl felt her chest rise with emotion, not dramatic, but full. She had spent a lifetime showing up for scenes, for lines, for expectations. But now, in this quiet moment, she felt the weight and gift of showing up simply as herself. After the service, she stepped outside into a breeze that smelled faintly of pine and early spring. Walter was there, tending to the chapel's side garden. He looked up when he saw her and smiled in that steady, wordless way of his. "You came," he said. "I did." He dusted his hands on his trousers and walked toward her. "Would you like to come help me with the lilies?" he asked. "I'd love to," she answered. And so they knelt side by side, pressing bulbs into soft soil, their conversation light, their silence even lighter. It wasn't a grand moment. No music swelled. No declarations were made. But it was real. And in that sacred ordinariness, something beautiful began to take root. That evening, Meryl returned home with dirt under her fingernails and a calmness in her spirit she hadn't felt in years. She looked out at the garden, now waking from winter, and whispered a quiet thanks, not just for the day, but for the timing of it all. Some things bloom late, and that's perfectly all right. She made herself tea, opened her notebook, and wrote one simple line: "I am still learning how to be known." It was early evening when the call came. Meryl was folding laundry, not because she had to, but because the rhythm of it soothed her. The phone rang once, then again. She recognized Anna's number instantly. "Hi, darling," she said, balancing the phone between her ear and shoulder. "Mom, do you have a minute?" Meryl paused. Her daughter's voice carried that particular tone only a mother could detect, brave but trembling. "Always," she replied, setting the towel aside. There was a silence, then a breath. "I got some results back," Anna said, "from my checkup last week. They found something in my breast. It might be nothing, but they want more tests." Meryl sat down. "Okay," she said, "one step at a time." "I didn't want to scare you," Anna continued, her voice small, "but I didn't want to go through this without you." Meryl closed her eyes, holding back a wave of emotion. "You don't have to go through anything alone," she said. "Not now. Not ever." They talked for nearly an hour. About the biopsy scheduled for Thursday. About the boys needing to be picked up from school. About fear and how it doesn't shrink just because you act brave, but how it loosens when someone sits beside you. That night, Meryl didn't sleep right away. She stood at her window and watched the moon rise slowly, like a guardian. And for the first time in a long while, she prayed aloud. "Let her be all right," she whispered. "Let her be okay. But if she's not, let me be strong." The next morning, she packed a small bag, left a note for Walter by his garden gate, and caught the early train to Minneapolis. She didn't overthink it. She just went. Because love, the kind that weathers storms and decades and miles, doesn't wait for perfect timing. When Anna opened the door, her face crumpled at the sight of her mother. "I didn't think you'd be here so soon." "You're my girl," Meryl said. "Where else would I be?" They sat on the couch, holding hands, not trying to solve anything. Just present. Just enough. Later, when the house was quiet and the kids were asleep, Anna leaned against her mother and whispered, "I don't feel brave, Mom." "You don't have to be," Meryl said gently. "You just have to be loved." Outside, the snow began to fall softly, covering the porch in silence and grace. If this story touched something tender in your heart, I'd be honored to know. Leave a comment below with a memory this story brought back to you, even a small one. I read every single one with care. Tulip,